Without further ado, we have Whitney helping control things behind the scenes today. And then Ryan and Marissa handed the keys over to me, so we promised not to crash the car today. But we've been excited about this conversation for quite some time. Early this year, the National Association of Realtors added to their staff someone who there's not enough we can say great about. So I'm not even going to try to attempt to go through everything that Bryan Greene has done in his career, but almost 3 decades at HUD and other great things that will be added to our knowledge base and our action plans as an association of more than 1 million people throughout North America. Our board in January, we did a video, Ryan and I did a video talking about the New York Newsday expose, a 5-year analysis of whether or not fair housing violations were happening in residential real estate. And if you haven't read that, take about an hour to sit down and watch the videos and see all the pieces to see the things that are happening. They are happening in every marketplace across the country. Our board and I, we all sat down and said, this is not something that we want to see happen anymore. And we're working on how we address it with education and with core standards and other things that are going to be a part of our membership requirements. But before we get into all of that, that's coming down the road. We have this great opportunity to welcome from the National Association of Realtors staff, Bryan Greene, to talk to us about his new role within NAR and some of the things that we're experiencing as an industry as it relates to fair housing and the importance of fair housing in our credibility as professionals in our industry. So I will turn it over to you, Bryan, and I'll be monitoring the Q&A to see if anything fascinating pops up. So please engage if anyone has anything to say.
Thank you, Greg, and it's great to join you all. I spent about 6 years of my life in Massachusetts, and it wasn't long enough. I wish I could have spent more time actually down in the Cape, but did get to go down there some and enjoy myself. 45 years ago, this week, the movie Jaws came out. And, people have been talking a bit about Jaws here in the United States during coronavirus, as people have been debating, whether or not to go in the water, whether the economy would, justify to us, reopening, and despite the fact that there's a threat out there. And it had me thinking a little bit more about Jaws, and I actually rewatched it recently. Now, first of all, an interesting thing, the film, as you probably know, is filmed up by you. So it's filmed off the beaches there. The book is actually set in Long Island. Peter Benchley's novel set in Long Island. And, Greg mentioned the Long Island Newsday investigation. And, you think of those issues as the submerged shark, they rose up there, they surfaced there, but they can surface up in Cape Cod, anywhere else in the United States, just the same. But one of the lines from that movie that really sticks with me, and it's one of the most famous lines in all of movies, is the line, "We're going to need a bigger boat." And that's what I've been thinking about recently, that as realtors, as real estate professionals, we're going to need a bigger boat to address the issues that face us. I mean, what the phrase essentially means is that the tools that we brought to the job may not be sufficient. And that's really the message that I think the Newsday investigation brought home for many of us. We've had the Fair Housing Act since 1968, 52 years. NAR's Code of Ethics from the 70s has said discrimination is prohibited in this profession. But what you see in that New York Newsday video, which I see someone made available in the chat, is that what may be happening under the surface may not be apparent to all of us because we do not have the privileged information of seeing how agents treat different people. And as a consumer, you may think you're getting perfectly good treatment, but you don't see that, say, the white consumer is being told about homes in a different area, or they're being told that, you know, schools are bad in a particular area and they should go somewhere else, or being told about crime, or they're not required to provide a photo of their driver's license or be pre-approved. All of those issues were surfaced in the Newsday investigation. And, you know, people can debate whether or not each of the instances constitutes unlawful discrimination, but it is pretty damning if you read the investigation and watch the videos. You know, they're matching testers to specific agents and looking at how those particular agents treat two different people and providing it on video. So, you know, while many people have been talking about the discussion we're having in the country right now following the killing of George Floyd as an awakening on race issues in the country, I think for many of us, you can say, you know, we had our big wake-up call when this Newsday investigation came out and, you know, told us that as guardians of the American dream, you know, we needed to wake up to what might still be happening all too frequently in the business. And that's where our Fair Housing Program Act came from. And I'm going to get into some detail about it, but let me first just say it's an acronym, and it stands for Accountability, Culture Change, and Training. And it's an acronym I came up with because when I read the Newsday investigation, I said, okay, you know, I'm hearing, you know, my colleagues and others say this makes the case that we need to do more training. And I said, well, training, yes, it's always good to do training. Maybe our training's not terribly effective, but we need a lot more than that. That this is also about culture, and it's also about accountability. And it's interesting, just recently, a friend of mine I saw talking about a different issue in our society, and he actually used the expression that culture, you know, eats rules and laws for lunch. That, you know, if you don't have the right culture out there, you know, you can have the laws, you can have the training, but people may not follow it. And then my point is you need the accountability, that irrespective of all, there has to be some consequence when people don't follow the law, when they don't follow our code of ethics, or when they don't follow the federal or state laws that have prohibited this practice for a long time. So, so it helped for us, even before George Floyd's killing, to be having this conversation within the Realtors about race and about the ongoing challenges we're facing. But of course, since then, we have joined this national dialogue, and I think it underscores the need for us to do even more. I mean, ACT is very focused on the transaction and making sure we stamp out discrimination in our practices as real estate agents, but we're also doing this in a bigger environment where we have bias in our culture, where we have bias that, you know, we bring into transactions as well. And so we need to talk about that. We need to talk about the larger structural dynamics in our communities that lead to different outcomes, and that the Realtors do have a role in helping the nation address that. No doubt, government played a big part in promoting the segregated landscape, but we as Realtors acknowledged in the 50th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act 2 years ago that we also joined in some of those practices. So we also need to be part of that solution. So I want to talk a little bit about that as well. We just did a survey. Actually, we've done the same survey twice in the last 6 months. The most recent survey we did was a community equality survey, which actually looked at, what realtors think about some of the questions that are coming up regarding policing. But built into that survey were 2 questions specific to fair housing. And they were a repeat of questions that we asked in January. The questions were, have you witnessed discrimination in a real estate transaction in the last 2 years? And in January, when we asked that question, and really I guess it was one question, but it has a couple of options for answers. In January, when we asked that question, and this was after Newsday, it was after, like 2 months after the Newsday investigation, 59% said they personally had not witnessed discrimination in a real estate transaction. 8% said that they had, and 33% said no, they had not witnessed discrimination in a transaction, but they believe it exists. And that particular finding was the one that I found most interesting, because people had an option to answer simply yes, no, or no, but I believe it exists. If only 8% have witnessed it, I take people at their word. But for the remainder, you would expect that even if you hadn't witnessed it, you would acknowledge that it still happens. So 59% just said flat no, 33% said no, but I believe it happens. And I think that is a big problem, because one, here I am talking about fair housing, and if only a third of our membership thinks it even happens, maybe I should take 2/3 of the day off. But I don't think that's the case. And if you watch the New York Newsday video, even if you were to debate some of the instances, I think you would conclude it still happens. We repeated that this survey, or that survey question this month. Slight difference in responses. 13% said they had personally witnessed it. That's up about 5 points. And then 49% said that simply said no, they hadn't, and 38% said no, but I believe it happens. And so compared to 6 months ago, that number is up only 5 percentage points. So 38% now say they believe it happens, even if they have not witnessed it. And so that is something we need to reckon with, that we're talking and spending resources addressing an issue which still too many people in the profession, and certainly our membership, don't recognize is still a problem. And I think part of that, again, is because many don't see it. And it's only with this kind of testing often that it becomes apparent. And so that's one reason why NAR supports this. We believe from a professional standpoint that we need to hold ourselves accountable. And this means even if people aren't reporting discrimination, or even if consumers aren't recognizing discrimination, we believe it's important to our professional standards to address this, and we believe it's important to society to address it. And you're turning away business. If they're qualified people, and testing, I mean, the way these tests are done, they're presenting to your face people, minorities who are slightly more qualified than whites in these tests, and people on the numbers are still viewing those persons as not, not equal or not as valued a customer. So that's a problem that we're also, that's, turning away business when that occurs. So accountability is something that we at NAR are emphasizing, for the profession. We want to make sure that state and local laws are strong, both the fair housing laws are strong, but also the licensing laws, so that if these matters are reported, that there is some real consequence. So we are working with a law firm to look at all the state laws, all the state licensing laws, identify what are the elements that are strongest that we want to make sure are must-haves in these laws, and then work with our state association executives to strengthen laws where they're weak. Just to give you an example, there are some states that have, ethics requirements, but don't explicitly talk about fair housing. Or there may be training requirements which deal with ethics, but there is no actual requirement that you spend a specific amount of time on fair housing per se. So that is just one example. But then even in terms of, what happens if you engage in a violation, there may be states that say, if there's a violation, you may lose your license, but that violation may have to be, a decision by a court. Whereas for other things that aren't discrimination, the licensing body might do its own investigation, make its own conclusion, and say you're out. And we know, a lot of people don't report discrimination or file lawsuits for discrimination in the courts. So we're looking at that question of, is the standard for license retention different when it comes to discrimination than it is for, say, other issues like allegations of fraud or the like? Do we require there be a conviction before the person loses a license? So we're doing that analysis across the board. We're also supporting self-testing. We are making a program available where companies who want to evaluate whether their agents are complying, we want to make that available. It's, confidential testing that a company can do so that they can self-correct. And we create the infrastructure for this. We partner with skilled fair housing organizations who can do this, and we draft the agreements between the companies and the fair housing group so that it's secured information. And so that we're in the process of doing. It's a heavy lift. We're devoting significant resources to creating this. We're hoping that we can fund most of it, but we're probably going to look to companies who want to do this to support it with funding as well, with the benefit being, we've developed a methodology, we have the partnership with the organizations, we just push a button and go. And we're talking about possibly wrapping that around with a broader training program that company can get. So that's another major accountability item we're doing. So that's the A in ACT, accountability. Culture change is the C. On culture, as I said, the best training, the best laws don't mean much if people don't follow them. And while accountability may be the stick, even better if through carrots we can get people to do what the law requires and what's in the best interest of us all, and has potential societal consequence if we don't. And so that's where I actually think this is kind of like the most interesting, most challenging part of trying to find ways to get people to recognize this is in your best interest. What I observed in the New York Newsday investigation was they tested 12 companies, did multiple tests against 12 companies. Sadly, they had findings against 10 of them. So the overwhelming majority had some agents who were treating people differently, according to Newsday. But there were 2 where they tested multiple agents multiple times and said, yeah, we can't say they're doing anything wrong. And I think that's very important. Collectively, these 12 companies were responsible for 50% of the sales out in Long Island. So they're all making money. 2 are doing everything, at least, when investigated, everything the way you should. And I think it's very important to look at those examples, talk to those agents, talk to those brokers, to understand, what it is about them that they say, well, this makes sense, this works. It seems sad you should ask that, but in an environment where, for whatever reason, many think they shouldn't follow the law or are having trouble following the law, it's helpful for us to hold up those who are doing it right. So we have an effort where we want to do a video and talk to more of these agents and companies, celebrate these leaders, and have them, speak to their peers about the importance of this and why this works for them. So that's one video we're producing. We have another video we're producing about fair housing in schools. If you watch that New York Newsday investigation, you'll see that the subject of schools keeps coming up over and over. Sadly, you hear even one agent actually telling someone that if they want to live in, I think it's Amityville, which also comes up in movies, that they want to live on this side of Amityville, not that side, because of the school district. And all these discussions about, specific blocks even that you want to live on because of the school district that it directs you to. And the school districts are overwhelmingly defined by the racial composition of the communities. And so schools end up often being a proxy for race in many of our metropolitan areas. And even when people are following the law and saying, here, look at this third-party information, a lot of that third-party information in terms of test scores, if it's just the test scores, is often just tracking, economics and race. And we are, even unwittingly in many of those situations, perpetuating some of the segregation. There's a lot more, obviously, that goes into schools than test scores. And we think there's an opportunity for us to work with other organizations to make sure that the information that's out there about schools is more variegated and provides a fuller picture of schools. And we also know that agents often don't really know the ins and outs of schools, and what they're often projecting can be just based on the demographics of schools and not even the most accurate information. So we want to dig into that. We think there's a lot to peel back on that subject, but we want to start that. We want to figure out how we just advance the discussion on that issue, especially since it seems as if agents really want to talk about schools. So we need to figure that part out. Finally, on the culture part, everyone has their assumptions about why discrimination still occurs in 2020. We shouldn't assume we know. And so we have all these plans and ideas of ways to fight the problem, or we want to just tell people stop doing it, et cetera. I think we need more information to better understand it. So while we shouldn't stop doing these other things, we want to have some more research into this and figure out how we can get the answers, because even the surveys that I shared with you, people don't acknowledge that it's happening. So, if you're just asking people like, why do you discriminate or something like that, you're not really going to get any reliable answers. So we're trying to find ways to study this and, get at it. In the New York Newsday investigation, Newsday provided a lot of different articles and a lot of different interviews with experts and things, and they talked about, why steering occurs. So there are many different theories about it, but we want to just do something really robust in that area. So that's culture. And then finally, training. Training is still essential. It's a foundation. People need to know the law. We think we can do better training than we have historically. I mean, I think most training often involves just people learning about the law and what they can't do. And maybe there are more effective ways to drive these points home. So one of the big trainings that we just launched is implicit bias training. And Greg mentioned that at the outset. So we produced a 52-minute video that is on our webpage. It's up there for free. You just go to nar.realtor, it's there. We produced this during coronavirus. Some people have said, oh, it's a bit long. I suggest, that one, since many people are still sheltering in place, you don't have to watch it in one sitting. The idea was you can watch this at your leisure and take the benefit from it. So you can watch 26 minutes one day and the other 26 the next. however you want in your own home. But I also want to point out, well, you aren't going to get over implicit bias in 52 minutes either. So this is just the start. And we actually are calling it an introduction to implicit bias training, because we're working with the same company, the Perception Institute, to do a 3-hour training. They're going to develop a curriculum that companies can use to train their agents. And they'll probably produce a longer video package to show how they would do it. But then the agents can use the companies can use the manual they create to do their own training for their individual agents. And we're working with members, with real estate agents, to develop that, so that the scenarios, the examples, the instruction is tailored to our industry. If you haven't watched the implicit bias video, the introduction, thank you, Whitney, for putting that out there. Please watch it. It is specific to real estate, but it doesn't get as deep as this 3-hour training will. It's a very exciting video. I mean, the beautiful production values, wonderful film editing. If you have an interest in, film editing and the like, I'll just tell you, these folks produced this in the middle of coronavirus in New York, with ambulances screaming down the street. They had to do this in their homes because they couldn't go into a studio. So you wouldn't believe it. And when you see the women talking, they're taping some of these segments at 2 a.m. in the morning when it's quieter. So they did a wonderful video for us, and we're very excited about the additional work we're doing with them. And NAR is also enlisting them to do some internal training as well for our staff. We're talking about how we get implicit bias training out to other associations. So we're having that conversation with them as well. As you might expect, following the killing of George Floyd and the national dialogue on these issues, they now are hearing from many companies who want to do implicit bias training. Historically, they've worked with police departments, hospitals, courtrooms, you name it. And we're in there. They're going to do our work first, but they're very busy right now. So we're very excited to be able to offer that kind of training. And then later today at 3 p.m., I'm having the kickoff with about 20 other folks at NAR to work on a project with Ernst & Young, their Noggin Labs, to do an online sort of game-like training. They call it gamification. So to create essentially a platform where people can engage in different scenarios, almost like a video game, where they're the agent, maybe in some scenarios, and in other scenarios, they're the consumer. Maybe in one scenario, they'll be flipped into a different role in the middle to help people through immersion relate to the experience of the housing transaction and where bias can enter in. So they've got a team of developers, some who worked in improv comedy and who have learned how these different scenarios that sort of force people to think on their feet are more effective training methods than just rote instruction. So we're very excited to be working with them on this effort. And I'm still just anticipating this just because I've never seen this kind of training on fair housing or on much of anything. So we're excited to be innovative in this particular area. So so that's what's coming. All very exciting. I want to say that in terms of the way forward for us, we believe it's very important that it's not just NAR leading. We want to see the government lead. In my role as Director of Fair Housing Policy, I'm also advocating to the legislature and to the executive branch on those things that NAR needs. And this actually cuts a few different ways. We want really balanced enforcement, but we want effective enforcement. And so there are some things that the federal government may pursue or do, or the legislator may pursue or do that we don't agree with. despite the best interests. But then there are others where we believe the resources and the approach are most effective. Just as one example, NAR has written a letter to the Congress saying that we strongly support more funding for fair housing testing, that really is the gold standard. And we do believe that it helps, keep us on our feet and following the most professional standards. So we've emphasized that. We're very grateful to see the federal government doing more to police online advertising. As you all know, we, in 25 years have gone from advertising principally in newspapers to almost all housing advertising online, or the principal way of people looking for property. And so we applaud the federal government for the work that it's been doing with Facebook. I actually was part of that when I was in the government to launch that. More recently, Google has agreed to drop targeting by zip codes, recognizing that it can perpetuate segregation and discrimination. Craigslist has been doing this work for a long time. Back when I was at HUD, we engaged Craigslist on this when they just let people, it was Wild Wild West in the 90s, they let people post almost anything. And I went out to San Francisco and sat in Craig's chair, and we went through the ads and got them to agree to filtering technology so that at least the most offensive things wouldn't come through. But then also they adopted fair housing standards that helped flag ads that were discriminatory and provided education to those who are posting. So we support those efforts. And then finally, of course, NAR has been a leader in in advocating for the federal government to prohibit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. In 2010, we established in our code of ethics that sexual orientation is prohibited in our sexual orientation discrimination is prohibited in our profession. And in 2013, we added gender identity. We still don't have a federal law that has that. What we do now have, just this past week, is a decision from the Supreme Court saying that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 in sex discrimination also prohibits discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. So what that decision says is, the existing law in prohibiting sex discrimination also prohibits this form of discrimination against LGBT persons. So that is very, very big, because the Fair Housing Act often looks to the employment discrimination case law in deciding how to interpret the Fair Housing Act. And the logic of the Supreme Court in this employment discrimination case is easily imported into the Fair Housing Act. It basically says, sex discrimination embodies LGBT discrimination as well. And so there is no reason why that language would not be applied in the housing context as well. So we think, at least from an administrative standpoint, with HUD and the Department of Justice enforcing the law, that they may look to that Supreme Court decision when they're interpreting sex under the Fair Housing Act. So that's a big step forward, and we think that will probably also apply to the Equal Credit Opportunity Act as well. So stay tuned to see how that goes. Let me just close by just saying we need continued leadership in this area. I stress that we're not just about the transactions, we're about the community as well. And we, as the National Association of Realtors, intend to stay engaged in community discussions about fair housing, whether it be advocating at the federal level, at the state level, or to do more in our individual communities to make sure that all people have the same opportunities in housing and the amenities that housing provides. So I'll pause right there, Greg, if we want to take questions,
Sure.
questions right now in the chat or Q&A, I'd be happy to answer them.
So we do have one question, but I just want to say, first, thank you for sharing all of that and those three core components with us. I mean, your remarks about culture really hit home with me, and I know with a lot of us. There are a lot of brokerage leaders who are sitting on the attendee list right now, and we know that there's obviously a rule making part in all of this, but then there's also why are the existing rules not being followed, and what do we need to do culturally to make sure that we all want to lead with doing better than the existing rules, let alone just add more rules on. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges. And I'm thankful for the work you're all doing. I mean, we all wanted to be with you in DC a few weeks ago. We all wanted to be with you in New Orleans in a few months. Neither of those are going to happen. But I think when we all come together on this, some amazing cultural shifts start to happen. And so the part I think I know I'm most excited about, and a lot of our board members and a lot of our realtor members are excited about, is how do we build this culture of leading the way on these, so that when we need to go have the conversations with our legislature and our communities about some of the other topics that are important to our industry, we have the credibility of leading on the most critical issues first. And so I think that's something I hope others join me in our mutual excitement for. So thank you for the work that you and the entire team have started to lead us on the culture piece as well. That's so important.
Thank you.
So one first question, again, it's from Jeffrey Klontz, and thank you for doing this webinar. He says, I do a lot of work with the LGBTQ clients and clients of color. I have great concern about the use of video and audio in homes that are being shown and being used as potentially a tool for discrimination. Has NAR discussed how the video monitoring of homes, or the use of video in home showings, or even the use of, video can be so many different things. So Jeff, if you want to clarify even more on that, but audio and video in homes being shown can lead the homeowner to say, I don't want to sell to that person, or I don't want to accept an offer from that person, or that person might need to pay more because I watched their showing on video and I didn't want to sell to that person. I wanted to sell that person instead. And has that been discussed?
Wow. No. This is probably something as agents you all talk about, but I was not aware of that issue. But I mean, of course, yeah. People have these systems and they watching their Nest, from their Nest camera from wherever. That is a great question, and I could be naive. Maybe many of my colleagues know this issue and have talked about it, but I've not had that conversation. It's a good reminder of where we are in terms of technology, right? Because I'm still thinking, yes, I know agents tell people to take down pictures and things in the house, et cetera. And there's a lot of discussion about these letters and, the love letters, but I hadn't heard about the cameras. My first thought is, of course, as real estate professionals need to push back. And I think we should maybe talk more about how real estate professionals more effectively push back, because, we're all human and we don't really want to alienate people. And even if they're engaged in, or want to engage in discrimination, people feel uncomfortable about making other people uncomfortable. And so I think there's a lot more work we can do around that, and how we, communicate to people that we're, that as real estate agents, we have to be professionals, and, I can't entertain that conversation or talk to you about that. Let's focus on the numbers. Let's focus on the paper. Here's what they're putting forward. So I do think, regardless, that is what agents have to do. But I am sympathetic to, the concern that this is just another way that these unfortunate conversations may crop up. I have to take that back. I really appreciate it. This job has been overload, because every time I talk to people, I hear something amazing like this, and I think, oh yeah, right. There's something else where maybe we need to provide guidance.
Yeah, and Jeff says, it ended up being, the client said, I liked the idea of two men buying my house, but that could easily be flipped around and used on the negative. And that leaves us in a spot where we're trained from the beginning of our careers as long as the client is giving us a lawful instruction, we want to adhere to the lawful instruction. But where do we get into that area of having to be the one that stands in front of our clients and say, wow, like we can't.
Yeah. And you know, I'm all for transparency. I mean, as awkward as it may be for people, they need to know you have a license. And things can go south very quickly. And, you know, you as the agent and as the seller, you know, you can advise them, we need to make sure everything's above board and defensible. So let's not go there.
Yeah, and
I would love to see what more we can do to help people with those conversations.
I think that camera one is going to be a thing that just, I mean, like Ryan, who's not here today, but he and I just even talk about, although our houses aren't wired for cameras, we both have babies at home. And our baby monitor now streams out to the universe at all times, and we can watch it from wherever. And like, you wouldn't even think that that's like a improper recording device, because it's our baby monitor, and that's how we check in on our toddlers. But that's there. And you know, someone asked, Charlene asked, is that even allowed? Can you record people without telling them? Yeah, I mean, there are all sorts of MAR, our state association, has been really, really great about really putting out information. So whether you use zip forms or dot loop, there are really great instructions and waivers that have to be presented, and even signage that has to be presented before someone can access a property where there are recording devices. So, if you're looking for that information, if anyone's looking for that information, talk to your broker, talk to your manager, or, go to the state website. And then we also have a legal hotline in our state that's staffed during the week where you can ask these questions. Hey, my client might have said something or done something, and that might be putting me in a tough spot. How do I deal with this? The legal hotline is a great resource for some as well.
Yeah.
Some other questions. Okay, so other than school districts, are there any other common examples of things to avoid, subtleties that should be avoided? And I would just say, if you watch the Newsday thing, I think the big takeaway from people, why it was so scary to people, is it was all very gray, very subtle, very, like, there was no one who was just like, you're not the right type of person for this house. It was so subtle. It was almost so unintentional. And I think some of the realtors even said, wow, I was trying to be really careful and really good, and they still walked into a minefield. So are there other common subtleties or examples that you think keep on coming up?
So, I would say for the last decade or so, in these conversations, it's often the agent telling the white tester these things, and they're not necessary. There are some moments in the Newsday videos where they say disparaging things about other communities to the white testers, right? Where they there's one guy who tells someone they don't want to live in a certain community. It's like I think he said it's like the United Nations over there. You've got everything. I think some people would want that diverse community, but he was disparaging it. And it's often in these conversations that the agents will talk, about the schools. I think schools end up being a number one issue. And in the Newsday video, I think one of the agents is insisting on talking about the schools, even though the customer doesn't have children and is not planning to. Says, but if you do, here's the neighborhood you want to be in, which makes it sound like it's maybe not about the school. But the other conversation is crime and resale value. I think there was one other thing, but often those things come up, and they also are, again, on their face appeared neutral and legitimate, but they often, especially if you're viewing who gets told what, it appears to be steering people. And I've looked at that and I've said that's sort of interesting because African Americans, Hispanics, and Asians, the other groups who are who are part of the other part of the test, they all care about these things too. And so it is interesting that there's a choice made to tell the white person about it, not the black person. Now, if this is unconscious bias on the part of these realtors, it's very possible that when they're talking to, say, a black buyer about a neighborhood, that maybe they're even thinking, oh, well, I don't want to disparage these majority black schools, or I don't want to tell them that, this area is high crime, because they'll be offended, but they, are saying it to someone of a different background. So so that's something to explore further, but it's often those conversations. And I think for a long time, realtors have said, especially when it comes to crime, not to talk about it and to direct people to other resources. And, I think we have to have more conversation about this, because clearly many agents believe this is what they, the value they bring to the transaction, to tell people about these aspects of the community. And I'm talking to a consultant about this question. In fact, the guy who started the Newsday investigation, a fellow named Bill Dedman, who's worked for a number of newspapers. He's no longer at Newsday, he's actually consulting. He's a Pulitzer Prize winner, started really the national dialogue on lending discrimination back when he worked at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. But we're having a conversation right now about just the role of realtors, and whether we should be talking about are these the discussions that realtors, or is this the value of having a realtor, that they can tell you these kinds of aspects about a community, or is it something else? Is it the fact that they know the paperwork and know how to run the transaction and get people the best deal? So I think there's a lot to discuss about that, because clearly we're too often stepping in it when we try to talk about these community assets.
I know the one that terrifies me as a brokerage leader, especially in an inventory tight market where prices are staying high and it's hard to attain home ownership. We do talk a lot about, if you're going to spend more money than you were hoping to spend, you need to make sure you're buying in a neighborhood that's got good resale value history. And that in there, that's steering. Like that could be, if that's not done the same way to everybody, that could be, and no one would sit there and say, well, no, I wasn't meaning to do anything wrong. I wasn't trying to do anything wrong. I was just, it makes sense. Every buyer should be concerned about resale value. But the way we say it, the way we present it is just, that's that can of worms that is so hard. Right.
You want people to be able to do their jobs, and it's in this larger context. I mean, they're doing it in this larger context, concerning a lot of things that realtors don't really have control over. And that's why, we talk about the role of government, because, if home values are depressed in predominantly minority areas because of lack of demand and other issues, or lack of resources or other investment in those communities, those aren't things necessarily that realtors have any role in, but it's affecting the business,
So we have a few more questions that came in the chat. So one person, so Donna asks, it's great knowing all the laws as we start our careers, but one thing we'd love to know more about is what you touched on, how, you're talking about almost doing a video game style training experience and going through the gamification of how we learn and how we adjust our culture on this. Is there any more insight you have into that?
I will be learning more today at our kickoff meeting. This is where the goal is to make this available by November for our annual conference, which you learned is now going virtual. And so this is a beautiful thing to be able to announce and show. In fact, I've been telling everyone, this is what makes this powerful, that we can show and not tell, right? Actually give people something that they can immediately use. So I don't know what it's going to look like yet, other than we've worked with Noggin Labs on other efforts, like our commitment to excellence and a few other things. And so my colleagues at NAR speak very, very highly of them and what they will deliver.
So two more questions that have come in, and then we want to try to keep it to our time window here. So I'm sure we'll have a great pathway to get you other information and learn other information from you as this all evolves. But one of the things that we've seen, obviously, in the past 3 months is there have been health waivers and health questionnaires that sellers or their agents or buyers and their agents have been presented or asked to present. And we've talked about at a state level how the state is not the State Association of Realtors is not endorsing or supplying any of those waivers, and that every brokerage should make sure they're doing so with the knowledge of their E&O provider and their own counsel. But we're seeing a lot of questions about whether or not this is creating some sort of discriminatory practice. If you're screening people during a health pandemic, like, are we going down a dangerous path there?
Right. So, and this is something perhaps Whitney can put out there. We put out guidance on coronavirus and fair housing on May 5th. And it's really, really good guidance. And we worked with the law firm of Wilmer Hale in developing it, anticipating many questions like this and responding to many that we had received. There's so many potential issues. Just on the health waiver, we say it doesn't violate the law to do it, but it's better to call it a COVID waiver. You really shouldn't be asking about anything else but COVID. And I want to stress that, right? Because someone, not thinking might think, oh, well, people with certain, underlying health conditions may be more susceptible to COVID, so I'm going to ask them about these. You can't do that. Never inquire about someone's disability. The issue that came up was whether COVID is a disability, and it probably is, and the fact that, you can die from it. That's the, most disabling condition. But, you also have a right to yourself and a right under the law to protect yourself from, a dangerous condition. And so the questions really need to be laser focused on symptoms of this particular disease that can put yourself or others at risk. And we caution in that guidance that, be careful if you're doing it in writing, because, you are then collecting that specific health information and storing it, with all the risks that entails. So you can do it verbally or you can do it in writing, but you're taking that risk and you should be conscious of that. But everyone has, we believe the law recognizes you have this right to protect yourself, but keep the, inquiry narrow.
Sure. Now, one of our guests, former state president and now president of our commercial association here in Massachusetts, Paul Yorkis, said first he'd love to have us get your contact info. So we'll make sure we get your contact info out to everyone. But in Massachusetts, we have a mandatory consumer relationship disclosure, and we have mandatory lead paint forms for both rental housing and residential purchases and sales. And those are only available in the English language. There's no translated document available for the two documents that we are absolutely required to use across the board. And is there any effort at NAR, and I believe you addressed this a little bit, working with the state licensing boards and all that stuff, is there an effort at NAR to make sure that that these things don't perpetuate and kind of the access to all is equal, no matter where they're from, no matter what language is native to them? And are there things you're seeing other states do successfully to handle that right now?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. I mean, so from a legal perspective, as a private association and private business owners, you're not required to provide this information in translated form. Certainly, if you're a property manager for a development that receives federal assistance, Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act applies, where for national origin, you are required, if there's a certain population that reaches a certain number or percentage of the population that speaks another language, to provide that information in that language. And the government has responsibility to make that material available too. And so that's happening for government assisted property. I'm not aware of NAR advocating that this be done. There may be some best practices or folks who are doing it voluntarily in other states. I'm happy to look at that. I mean, again, this is another area where potentially we can be a leader, even if the law doesn't require it, because you have people in the private market who are looking for opportunities too, who would benefit from that. But I think because it's not legally required, it's probably lower on the list of priorities. Something I'll look into. You know, right now we are identifying those things where we can lead, that we think are right, even if even the law is not currently requiring it. So I can add that to our list.
Well, I think this is a tremendous amount of information you've shared with us. We thank you for spending an hour with us on a summer Friday morning, when I know you're about to kick off a lot of very aggressive rollouts ahead of our now newly virtualized annual meeting in November. So we will look forward to watching and hearing about and learning through the progress that you and your team are making. You know, I know a lot of people in Massachusetts are jealous that we were able to have this conversation with you today. So we're thankful for your time. And this will be recorded. So if anyone wants to reference back to it, know that it's out there. We'll make sure that Bryan's team we have the access to all of their information, and whether through Ryan or through our state association, we can always get through to NAR at a direct level, and make sure the stories, and I think we saw just the example of the story about video cameras, how like that just totally opens our mind to a whole different thing. We're going to learn through our culture of sharing what's going on with each other and making us all better. So I think that hopefully we did a little bit of that today through this conversation. We thank you so much for your time. It's been an eye-opening hour with you. And if you have any last words you want to share with us, please go ahead, and then we'll let everyone get off on their summer weekend.
Yeah, no, just you know, share my email address, please, and my phone number, 202-383-1114. I think we're at the point where I've actually spent more time working from home than I have in the NAR offices since I started. But yeah, and just want to wish you all a great weekend. Happy 4th of July. And I hope you get to enjoy the beaches there.
Yes, and thank you so much, and best from us to you and everyone at NAR, and thank you for leading the way for us. We look forward to continuing all these conversations.
All right. Take care.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.